Hi readers, it's time for chapter 5 of the Sunbearer Trials by Aiden Thomas. So, the regular reminders, let's see. Number 1, there is profanity. Okay, number 2, get your book, follow along with me with your own highlighter pen, and then you'll know where the questions and answers and page numbers are going to be for the items on the quizzes that I make. And finally, I just want to remind everybody who might be interested that all of the elementary level and middle school level Oregon Battle of the Books quizzes for 2026 are ready and there and available on the website at bobqc.net. Okay, so here we go. And I'll let you know when I'm ready with this quiz, but I haven't even started because first I read the book. Okay, chapter 5. Teo's feet moved under him, but he had no idea where he was going. Camera flashes exploded in his vision as people passed in a blur, murmuring and stepping out of the way while someone guided him through the observatory and down the main steps. There was a groan of wooden doors opening and then closing again behind him. All other sounds were muffled except for the thunderous pounding of his pulse. Teo? His mom's face materialized before him. Her hands were on his shoulders. She'd never squeezed him so hard. Teo, Quetzal repeated, voice tight. Deep creases puckered the smooth skin between her delicate brows. Teo didn't want to see it. Just past her shoulder stood an astronomical clock. The main dial represented the position of the sun, moon, and planets, nearly in alignment now in the sky. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that. There's an astronomical clock, and the sun, moon, and planets are almost perfectly in alignment. A calendar dial with medallions representing the months was encircled by another that displayed the gods' glyphs. A deep, hollow ticking sounded from deep within. You need to take a deep breath, pajarito. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The crushing weight of reality dropped onto him. Wait, no! He jerked back from his mom suddenly, acutely aware of his heart hammering in his chest. I'm not... This is impossible. I can't compete in the trials, he said, a strangled laugh catching in his throat. This couldn't be real. It was a fever dream or maybe some kind of sick joke. Searing heat clawed up Teo's throat. His lungs fought against his binder, but it tightened around his ribs like a giant fist. Focus on your breathing, Teo, Quetzal said, her voice infuriatingly calm as she slowly moved a step closer. Teo shook his head fiercely. I can't. There's no way. The circlet of feathers slipped down his forehead. The sunburst crown tilted to the side. He ripped the crown off his head and hurled it across the room. Metal clattered over stone as it skidded across the floor before hitting the base of the clock. In a blink, it disappeared. The heavy weight dropped back onto his head, highlighting that. This is what happened when he tried to take off the Sunbearer contestant crown and throw it because he didn't want to do it. It just disappeared when it hit the clock and ended up right back on his head again. Teo yanked it off again and held it out in front of him. The gold glinted dully. The cold, pointy rays dug into his clutching fingers. Teo's head swam, the room gently swaying with him. I don't want this, he insisted, looking to his mom for help. She only stared at him, delicate hands pressed over her mouth as her black eyes glistened. Behind them, the doors groaned open. Luna walked in. Instead of being outraged or confused, she only watched Teo, silent and still and silent. How could she be so calm when the world was ending? This is some kind of mistake, Teo said to the goddess, desperate for some sort of reaction. I'm just a jade. Another wild laugh shook through him. I can't compete in the Sunbearer Trials. Soul chose you. Luna said, voice steady. Her dark eyes shone with tiny pinpricks of silver like stars. You must compete in the trials. How am I supposed to compete with the Golds? I'm not a hero. They've been training their whole lives for this, and I'm not even allowed to go to the same school. Teo shouted, clutching the sunburst crown in his trembling hands. I don't want to be a sunbearer. Not when someone had to die. Luna's expression remained placid, but Quetzal flinched. Teo spun to face his mom. Mom, tell her! Teo's mother pressed her lips between her teeth for a moment. Teo could see her throat dip in a swallow before she spoke slowly and carefully. I know you're scared, Teo. He waited for her to tell him that it was going to be okay, that this was all a huge mistake, that they could go home right now, and he was going to be all right. But as he stood there, waiting, no reassurance came. She could only stare at him, at a complete loss for words. A shiver dragged through Teo's spine. Why wouldn't she tell him it would be okay? In the heavy silence, the clock continued to tick. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Mom? It was little more than a croak before the doors banged open again. A high-pitched ringing made all three flinch and clamp their hands over their ears. Luna! Malasuerte bellowed. The Dios radiated dark energy trembling around his edges like smoke. Teo stumbled back into his mom, but Luna straightened, wincing, but not budging, as the Dios charged toward her. You tell Sol they cannot have Xio for their games. Malasuerte's voice rumbled through every bone in Teo's body, a terrible thundering sound. Malasuerte towered over Luna, but she didn't back down. Remember, Xio is Malasuerte's son. And so Xio's dad is like, you can't have my kid. And Xio's also a jade. Sol has chosen Xio to compete in the trials, Luna said, her voice steady and unwavering. An ugly snarl curled Malasuerte's mouth, pulling back to reveal sharp, growing teeth. Sol is wrong. Suerte, Quetzal warned. The ear-splitting ringing grew louder with the god's rage. Teo bit his tongue and resisted the urge to scratch the itching palm of his left hand. It was then that Teo noticed Xio. He stood behind his father, so small in comparison. He covered his ears with his hands, squinting up at his dad. The sunburst crown still sat crooked on top of his mop of curls. Sol is not wrong, Luna said, lifting her chin, and they do not make mistakes. Xio was chosen for a reason. I'm going to go backwards because I forgot. I want to highlight the fact that Malasuerte comes roaring in saying they can't have Xio, his son, in the trials. Okay. The whites of Malasuerte's eyes turned blood red as his form shook violently. A third eye peeled open on his forehead. Ooh, that's weird. Highlighting. Its pupils startlingly blue as the god grew larger until he was hunched over Luna. The room trembled, and for a moment Teo feared Malasuerte's shoulders would burst through the ceiling. I would tear this city to the ground before I'd let you take him from me. Malasuerte's skin glowed scarlet, washing the room in red. With a sudden jerk, Quetzal grabbed Teo. Her wings enveloped him, blocking Teo and covering his eyes from seeing the enraged god. Teo tried not to let his legs give out from under him. He had heard stories of how if a Dios lost their temper, the sheer force of their wrath could melt anyone less than a god who was standing too close. Highlighting that. If a god lost their temper, anyone who wasn't a god who was standing nearby could melt. Stop this before you do something you regret, Luna said sternly. Xio is my son! Malasuerte roared. Teo squeezed his eyes shut as the ringing cut through his head. His mom tightened her arms around him. The itching was unbearable, like ants burrowing into his skin. Dad, stop. The quiet voice somehow cut through all the noise. The ringing in Teo's ears slowly ebbed. Hesitantly, his mom loosened her grip. We both know there's nothing you can do. Carefully, Teo peeked out from behind his mother's wing. Malasuerte, still giant and terrifying, looked down at his son. I just want to get it over with. the young boy said, chin lowered and cheeks red. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Because Malasuerte's back was to him, Teo couldn't see his face. Please? Teo asked. The ringing in Teo's ears and the itching of his palm faded away. With a long, low sigh, the god of bad luck shrank until he was back to his usual size. Malasuerte's shoulders bowed over his chest, arms falling to his sides. Shio stepped closer, and Malasuerte placed his large hand on the back of his son's head behind the sunburst crown. Wait here, Quetzal told Teo. He watched as his mom and Diosa Luna spoke in hushed tones to Shio and Malasuerte. Compared to Shio, Teo's situation didn't seem nearly as dire. Shio had only just turned 13 a couple months ago. He hadn't even hit a growth spurt yet and still had round baby cheeks. Shio was only a jade and the son of Malasuerte at that. What awful luck. Would Sol really select both of them only to be decimated in the competition? Teo averted his gaze, a lump forming in his throat. He looked around the room, taking in their surroundings. They were below the observatory. Across from the clock was a desk that, judging by the star charts and astronomical instruments, must belong to Luna. A map of Reino del Sol had been engraved into the surface, and the different cities noted by small figurines of each god's glyph carved from pieces of gold and jade. Around the room, murals with faceless figures and brightly colored scenes were painted on the walls. Teo realized they told the story of Reino del Sol. All right, so the murals on the walls tell the story of Reino del Sol. There was the creation of the world and the breaking of the seven-pointed star. Dark celestial figures fighting the golden jade diosas illustrated the war with the obsidians. The final mural showed the people of Reino del Sol living happily under the golden sunburst, but it was the scene just before it that Teo approached for a closer look. I'm going to highlight that the final mural in this room showed the people of Reino del Sol living under the golden sunburst. Okay, so Teo looked at the scene right before the last one. The gods stood in a circle holding the sunstones in their outstretched hands. Teo spotted his mom with her blue and green wings right away. In the center, Tierra was on her knees, surrounded with swirls of red and orange fire. Sol lay dying in his arms. Their body was painted in metallic gold, a dagger in their chest, and crimson rivulets of blood spilling around them. On the wall, the clock ticked away. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Luna led Teo and Shio inside the Sol temple, leaving their parents behind. His mom had told him that the gods weren't allowed to visit their children during the trials to avoid cheating, but that she would be there to watch every event. When the rankings were displayed at the end of each trial, they could steal a moment together, and then there would be a final banquet with their families the night before the last trial. All right, so I'm going to highlight this. No visiting during the trials to avoid cheating, but when the rankings were displayed at the end of each trial, he could visit with his mom a little bit and talk. And then there would be a final banquet with the families the night before the last trial, when someone would die because they would have to be sacrificed. As he followed Luna through the opulent halls, Teo's mind spun, trying to think of a way out of this mess. If he snuck out of the temple, he'd have to steal a boat. If he made it that far, he'd have to pass through the waterfalls, which were operated by the Sol priests. And even if he somehow got through them, what would he do? He couldn't go home to Quetzalán, so at best, he'd be on the run for the rest of his life. And at worst, well, he wasn't sure what the punishment was for deserting the trials, but given what happened during the closing ceremony, it was probably nothing good. The only thing he could do was not get himself killed. If he could stay high enough in the rankings to not come in last, he could survive this. Teo stole a glance over at Shio. The younger boy followed the moon goddess silently, eyes downcast. His expression was blank, like he'd already resigned himself to his fate. Teo hated it. There was the distant sound of chatter before they rounded a corner and found the golds. They were in a group talking among themselves, except for Naya, who was off to the side pacing back and forth. As they approached, the talking stopped and everyone turned. Otzi was braiding Soshi's hair on an emerald green velvet couch, while Marino and Desi leaned against the arms. Ocello smirked, looking Teo up and down, while Aristella shook her head, an amused quirk to her lips as she whispered to Ocello. And there was Aurelio. He frowned at Teo, staring at him almost calculatingly as the coals smoldered around his neck. Teo's face burned with heat. Dude! Naya shoved him and he stumbled. The fuck? I have no idea, he replied, trying to keep his voice down. This is wild. I know. Naya yanked him into a hug, lifting him off his feet. We're going to have so much fun together. A surprised laugh jumped in Teo's throat. Leave it to Naya to see the silver lining of his probable death sentence. You always talk about how you wish you could see the other cities, she said, setting him back down. I'm going to highlight that he's going to see the other cities by competing in the Sunbearer Trials. Yeah, but not like this, Teo hissed under his breath. I was supposed to be in the stands watching the Sunbearer Trials, not competing in them. But Naya didn't seem to get it. We can hang out, stay up late talking and playing games. She rattled off happily. I could even teach you how to fight. Teo blinked at her. Was she serious? A terrible scene played out in his mind's eye. Naya, the Sunbearer, standing over his lifeless sacrificial corpse. Thankfully, he didn't need to come up with a response because Luna called them to attention. Congratulations, competitors, on being chosen for the Sunbearer Trials, Diosa Luna said. I think we've all had a long day, so if you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms for the night, she said, signing as she spoke. This way. The Golds fell into step behind the Diosa, excitedly murmuring to one another. Shio followed them at a safe distance, and Teo and Naya lingered at the very back. Why is she signing? Teo asked Naya. She's signing, doing sign language. Desi's deaf, she said with a shrug. Desi was tall and had deep, warm black skin and a high fade with sponge curls. He was objectively beautiful, but not in a chiseled supermodel kind of way. He had soft features, kind eyes, and the sweet sort of smile that made your legs feel like jello. Desi followed Luna, watching her hands attentively as she led them down the hall. He's like a total badass. We all knew he'd get picked, Naya went on. He's really strong, super smart, and the powers he got from his mom? Naya let out a low whistle. What are his powers? Teo asked, but they were interrupted before Naya could answer. You'll be staying here tonight, but tomorrow we will be boarding the boat to travel to the first host city after breakfast, Diosa Luna announced as they walked. This is the beginning of a very long journey for all of you, so I suggest getting as much sleep as you can. Can we check out the rest of the temple? So she asked, a hopeful lift in her voice. Luna smiled. No, you may not. She addressed the group. You are only allowed to see your parents at the beginning and at the end of each trial, and communicating with any of your priests is considered a conflict of interest. Cheating, Marino said and signed to his friends. However, there will be soul priests available 24/7 throughout the competition. If you need something, just ask them, Luna continued. A pair of soul priests stood on either side of the next doorway, smiling as they passed through. Teo wasn't sure if they actually were there to assist or to guard. Naya gave Teo's arm a nudge and nodded towards Shio. How's he taking it? She whispered. The younger boy stood off to the side, nervously twisting a bracelet on his wrist. Teo winced. Better than his dad, I guess. This door leads to the dining room and kitchen, Luna went on. Diosa Pan Dulce and Dios Mais kindly volunteered their services for the duration of the trials. Okay, so Diosa Pan Dulce and Dios Mais volunteered their services. They're the ones that are going to be providing food during the whole trials. They'll cater all your meals during our travels, and if you need anything, if you need something in between, you may ask them. What happened? Naya whispered. Teo quietly filled her in on how Malasuerte completely lost his shit. Naya frowned. Huh? What? Naya shrugged. I'm surprised, is all. Malasuerte has always seemed kind of... She tipped her head from side to side. Aloof? Does that mean full of himself and acts like he isn't bothered by anything? Yes. Then yes. Aloof. Full of himself, acts like he isn't bothered by anything. I really don't think Shio has anybody else, even outside of the trials. He seems like kind of a loner, Teo said. His chest was tight as he watched Shio looking around the room, giving Aurelio and the others a wide berth. My little troublemaker, Malasuerte had said. Teo turned to Naya. We should try to look out for him. Naya's eyebrows lifted. Yeah? Yeah, I mean, he's a defenseless little 13-year-old, and he's a jade. We haven't been trained for any of this shit. It's like Sol has chose just us to be an easy sacrifice. Highlighting this. Take care of the kid, because he's only 13, he's a jade, and Teo thinks that maybe the Sol chose 2 jades just so they'd have an easy sacrifice. Naya finally looked worried. I didn't think about that. And outcasts need to stick together, right? Teo asked, nudging her with his elbow. Right. Naya replied, already convinced. Around another corner, Luna showed them to their sleeping quarters. A long hallway stretched out before them, lined with doors, each of which had a Diosa's glyph on the front. Your priests already brought up your belongings. This is where I leave you, Luna said. I need to go reconvene with the other Diosas. For some reason, her starry gaze lingered on Teo. I would suggest turning in early and getting a good night's rest. Tomorrow we will begin our journey. I think she's worried about Teo and Naya staying up all night, like it's a slumber party, but he really needs to get rest. Teo's room was at the very end of the hall, across from Shio's. He thought he should say something to the younger jade, offers him some kind of reassurance, but Shio ducked into his room without so much as pausing, the door snapping shut behind him. Inside, Teo's first thought was to wonder whether or not his contraband had made it, but that was quickly replaced with shock over how big his room was. He had his own living quarters back at Quetzal Temple, but he just had the same lumpy twin bed and cheap furniture that he'd always had since he was a toddler. This place was so fancy. For such an old temple, they really hadn't skimped on interior renovations. There was a large window with expensive-looking drapes, gold furniture, and a door that he assumed led to the bathroom. When he turned to inspect the massive bed, Teo nearly jumped out of his skin to find someone waiting next to it. Huemac! Highlighting. Teo gasped, clutching a hand over his chest. You scared the shit out of me. I can't stay for long, Huemac interrupted in a hushed tone, crossing the room so quickly it made Teo stumble back. Huemac's dark eyes locked on Teo, his posture rigid. Teo had known Huemac his entire life, and not once had he ever seen the head priest of Quetzalon break a single rule. What are you? Because remember, he's not supposed to be in there. Huemac's a priest. He is not supposed to be near Teo right now because Teo is already now with the competitors. Huemac gripped his shoulders and squeezed them tight. Be quick on your feet around Soshi and steer clear of water, or else Marino and Atsi will use it against you. Highlighting this, he's giving him tips of, what to do and who to avoid and stuff during the competition. Don't get near Desi during competition. You can outsmart a Cello. They may have brute strength, but they lack tactical strategy. You're clever and you're fast. Use it to your advantage. And Teo. He blinked up at Huemac at a total loss for words. Huemac leveled him a hard stare. Stay out of Aurelio and out of Stello's way. Teo jumped as the door behind him creaked. Naya stood there, having already changed into a loose white crop top and a pair of spandex shorts. When she saw Teo and Huemac, she froze. Huemac released Teo and stood up straight. I have to go now, he said. I put your backpack in the armoire, he added, giving Teo a pointed look before swiftly exiting the room. Naya looked back and forth between Teo and the empty hallway. I thought we weren't supposed to talk to our priests. I thought we weren't allowed to talk to our priests, she said, face screwed up in confusion. We're not, Teo said, rubbing his shoulder where Huemac's fingers had gripped him. Then what was he doing here? Giving me advice, I think, Teo murmured. It was so unlike Huemac to do anything against protocol. It was unsettling. Did he really think Teo was in that deep of trouble? He told me how to deal with the gods during the trials. Naya gasped and quickly closed the door behind her. Huemac was cheating? She hissed under her breath. I'm impressed. Okay. What did he say about me? Nothing. Naya scoffed. Teo rolled his eyes. What's up? Oh, Naya said, as if just remembering. I was going to see if you wanted to raid the kitchen. An amused grin tugged the corner of Teo's mouth. In all the chaos, at least he could rely on Naya's insatiable appetite. I'm down, he said, as he took off the circlet and sunburst crown, tossing them onto the bed. This time, the crown stayed put. I think we should invite Shio, too. We're going to have our own little misfit gang, Naya grinned as she leaned against the closed door, crossing her arms over her chest. Teo removed his heavy feathered cape and then hesitated. He glanced around the room. Where's the armoire? What's an armoire? I was hoping you'd know. I know. It's like a closet thing. It's like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's like a wardrobe. Actually, I'm going to show you. I have an armoire. I think it is one. It's this. See that? I decorated it with ocean stuff, but it's like a freestanding closet. Okay. Teo and Naya exchanged a look before breaking into laughter. It felt good and released some of the tension from his shoulders. If he had to face the trials, at least he had Naya to face them with. At least he wasn't alone. Okay, there it is. Chapter 5. And Chapter 6 soon to follow. It's getting exciting. I'm into it. I hope you are too. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep reading. Want to see my cat? I want to show you my cat before I sign off. Here's my keys laying here. This is Astro Cat. He's watching. There he is. There's Astro. He's a silly boy. Okay, now I'll say goodbye. Bye.
You read the books, now ready, get set at BOBQB.net. You read the books, now ready, get set at BOBQC.net.